right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session on AO's 2019-106, 2019-113, a resolution on SWOO development and the creation of a commission and other SWOO topics. Let's go ahead and start with introductions of Mr. Constant.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera.
Suzanne LaFrance. Austin Davis.
Forrest Dunbar, there is no SWOO.
Nate Salazar.
Pete Peterson. Brett Dice.
Krista Kennedy.
Jason Bockenstedt.
Alex, let's chief. Just so it becomes.
All right, so which one of you two would
What's up?
want
Actually,
to?
Marks. You guys, you want to sit up here? You may want to chime in.
We will. We'll
When you do, make sure you identify yourself. We'll do it.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, is there a reason we don't also have the funding ordinance here, or do we? The one that's actually before 11's on the agenda, right? Well, but it's all part of the conversation. I guess it's fine, but it just seems that it's a missing piece.
Okay, so Mr. Weddleton, do you want to go ahead and frame this discussion and then we'll get started?
Sure, I'd like to frame the discussion and get started. I would like to start with 2019-318, which I call rate study first, and then go to the one I call Stormwater Utility Guidelines, that's 106, and then we could go to 113 about the commission, and see where we go from there. So everybody's got that in front of them. So I think that to start off, I think the stormwater utility report that we had and other documents over many years and my work on the Hillside District Plan and so on, that the idea of a stormwater utility is a good idea. It's been out there. It's in our comprehensive plan from 2000. So this is a 20-year item in our comprehensive plan that says we should do it. And I think it's been kicked down the road. No one's wanted to deal with it. And I think it's great that the administration has brought this forward. And I think it's a brave thing because it will be contentious. So it's good that it's out there. I want it to succeed. And I think if right now we've gotten ahead of ourselves, the public needs to be all in. And I know we've tried to, but they come in at the last minute. And we just have to live with that reality. But this will be something that will be with us forever. We need to know what it is, and we need to do it in a way that is publicly acceptable. So I'm for a stormwater utility in some form. I think it's a great idea. So I don't want anyone to think that the ordinances here in the resolution are opposed to it or trying to stop it at all. My intent is let's do it in a way that this will be successful. Let's deal with the hard stuff early and get that worked out. And kind of context, when we were doing the Hillside District Plan, we were looking at this. Should we do a stormwater utility? Just looking at the hillside. And the consultant said, it's really easy. You set these things up. It takes 6 months. We know how to do it. There are thousands in the country. And you come and do your aerial photos, et cetera, and so on, and you can set it up really fast. Then you spend 2 years in court fighting over it. I don't want to spend 2 years in court fighting over it. I want to deal with the hard stuff early, and then things roll out faster. And that's in particular why the rate study, I think, should be done first. And I know there's an RFP out there that's all encompassing, and we have this picture on front that says, here's what we'll do. I think that's too much too fast. We need to say, how much can we spend? What's palatable to the people of Anchorage, particularly the people who have not been putting money into stormwater. Providence Hospital, school district, how will you deal with them? All the nonprofits, churches. Let's get that battle going as soon as possible and before we do anything else. So this just simply says do a rate study first. And parallel, my son, he's 20 and he's got a job. He's really excited and he wants to buy a house because he is sick of paying rent to someone who's getting rich off him, which happens to be his mom. But
No hard feelings.
I don't know. But if you go before you buy the house or choose the house, you go find out how much can I spend. And that's what we're doing here. So we bracketed with that stormwater report that we spend $10 to $12 million a year roughly, not including paying off bonds, just with street maintenance and so on doing their thing. But we have a $1 billion backlog. So if you say over 25 years, maybe we catch up, that's roughly $40 million. So we don't need to know every pipe that we would do, every little project. We know enough now. We need between $10 and $40 million. We we can start a rate study. How will we collect that? How will we count impervious area? How will the unnatural state homestead on the hillside compare to Walmart downtown? How will we do that? How will we treat areas that deal with road service areas or Chugach, wherever that's got a system very unique? How will they be treated compared to the hard set area? And we need to look at that so people going forward with the debate can say, this is about what it would cost me if we raised $20 million. And we can get that discussion going. So this just says, it doesn't say don't do all that other stuff. Let's do the rate study first. Then it kind of tells us how much can we buy when we go forward with the other stuff.
All right, thank you, Mr. Littleton. All right, so I have a lot of folks on the queue. Start with Ms. Alton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hear the request for a rate study, but I have a few questions about that. Maybe it will get answered throughout. One is this 106 actually has quite a bit of specificity, and I thought that
I'm
was...
talking 318.
Oh, 318. Okay, sorry. Well, 318, yeah. So even the same. I thought that was what we were hiring the consultant to figure out was the rate study that you were looking for, but then to go a little bit further, kind of all in one push. And so I guess I would want to know where's the drawback and what AWU or Stormwater Utility is already trying to do. Like, where's the big difference and why should there be that difference? And you suggest that a budget of $100,000 is enough in the resolution. So I guess where does that figure come from? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay. Let's go through and if you could address all the questions. Okay, thanks. I just want to have this back and forth. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering how we could come up with a rate study before we had a capital improvement plan. If we don't know what the capital improvements are going to be, I don't see how we come up with a reasonable rate. Just wondering.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Kennedy.
Two things. I'm kind of along the same line. You know, the idea that the master plan has to come first, and the rate study is part of the master plan. So certainly want to see all that come together kind of at the same time. I know I just don't want this cart before the horse kind of a thing. The other thing is, I just wanted clarification. My understanding is we do not have a $1 billion backlog. We have $1 billion worth of projects over the next 25 years that could be foreseeable. So is that fair? I mean, I just think we have to be careful about, I mean, really, if we told the community there's $1 billion worth of infrastructure needs in our system, they're going to totally freak out. So, but if we're planning down the road for 25 years that we're going to need this much money, then they might be able to see there's some value to starting now to be ready for 25 years from now. But anyway, so just clarification on the $25 billion. What does that represent?
Why did I say 25 billion?
One.
25 years. $1 billion.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Probably 10
Thank
per
you.
year. But not a billion.
So we've had a lot of questions, we haven't had answers yet. So I want to hear from the administration about this proposal, because it seems like this could be an amendment to the 1.5 million. What's that?
We did that.
Well, but I don't understand. I mean, so I want to hear from the administration what they think about this, because to me, this seems like it's incorporated in the 1.5 you're asking for, correct? And is there, it seems like you would do the rate study sort of as soon as you could, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. I think I have a misunderstanding of what exactly you're asking for, and because it seems like it's already included what the administration is asking for. So can you speak to that?
Sure. Do you want me to answer that now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Mr. Weddleton did a very good job kind of just extrapolating kind of what are the large numbers that we currently spend right now. And if that's the simplest form that you wanted to take to try to figure out a rate study, could we do that? Absolutely. But I think the problem that we would have is there is all of the other work that needs to go into that we're going to do over the next couple of months that is going to inform the rates. I mean, part of it, I mean, I don't want to jump too far into some of these other ordinances, but depending on if we separate into districts, the Hillside and Ardsa and Eagle River, Girdwood, that's going to have a substantial impact potentially on what each of those areas pay in rates. Along with, I think in one of these you're saying you want us to come up with what incentives do we provide, and for what and where. All of those are going to have major impacts on what the ultimate rate study is. And then the final piece is that, just frankly, we'd be setting that money on fire, because if we got to the end of the process, we would have to do another rate study based on all of the information that we have then received throughout the process before the RCA would ever accept it. We couldn't use the rate study that we did at the start, do all the work, and then submit that as part of our application. We'd have to do we'd have to do another rate study for it to be. So that would be, kind of our comments that, we need to. I think one of the things is we can't make well-informed decisions in the absence of good information, and that's what we're trying to get, is the good information to inform the most important aspect of that, which is what are the rates going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So I'm going to go to Mr. Dyson, and then I'm going to go to Mr. France and Mr. Weddleton. Okay, so yeah, Mr. Dyson, then Mr. Constant, then back to Mr. France and Weddleton to answer any questions that have been brought up. So Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, a little information I need. I may have gotten it, missed it, or forgot it, but I assume that this utility we're creating will deal with surface runoff problems we have that are, the water is now going where it shouldn't go and often into our creeks. It's not just fixing, yeah, Mr. Welton, yes or no?
That's my assumption.
Yeah, all right. And so then I'm very interested in seeing a large source of, or some of our environmental problems in the runoff. People with huge acreages of parking lot that are black body receptors, and amongst the worst things we can do, but particularly the runoff. Crystal and I have our new high school out there, huge impacts on the Dow Street subdivisions that weren't dealt with. So, all right, and I'm like Mr. Peterson. It seems to me it's going to be tough to do a credible rate study without understanding the scope of the plan. But I agree, we need that in order to sell and reassure our constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. I want to note for the record that we've been joined by Mr. Perez-Padilla. Mr. Constant.
Thanks, and I just added, it's more than just the CIP. What we need to have as well is the structure of the organization, the operating costs, and all of the elements that get composed into the whole utility, I think, before we can understand what the rates will be. And I think that that's all part of the overall study.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, so back to you, Mr. Weddleton.
Sort of. Okay. We recently have been through this exact exercise, and it blew up in our face, and we don't know how it's resolved yet. We did a great study of just what that port needs. What do we need to do to modernize that port? And then we went and said, here's what it'll cost. And we went back to the people who would be paying it. They're not having it. But we had a great capital project study done, okay? And it looked great, very convincing. But we can't afford it. Okay, now a rate study for a water utility, the stormwater utility, is a little different than this. You can pick a number. Let's say we shoot for $20 million a year. So you're going to pick a number. You could have a lot of different projects, but you're not going to jump it up, down. We're going to do these ones this year, so it's going to be $10 million. The next year we're going to do 15. The next year we're going to lower it. We're going to pick something fairly steady state. So we know enough now to know roughly where that number is going to be between 10 and 40 million. So you just don't need all that detail. You can have it, fine, but you don't need it. But we need to figure out how much are people willing to reach into their wallet for. We need to know now, so we don't end up like we have before. This rate study for stormwater utility, and is outlined in the stormwater report, roughly, different ways that it's done. And I think it presents maybe 3 different ways, and there's a variety. But we need to see how that general structure will look. How will you treat a hillside lot, a large lot undeveloped in Eagle River, compared to the Walmart? Okay, and that's done. How do you treat impervious surface? Does everyone pay? Do you emphasize a fixed rate for everybody plus an increment based on their impact on the stormwater system? Or you just go cost causer, cost payer, the natural undeveloped lot on the hillside pays 0, but you know the Walmart pays more. And I would expect in a rate study to have 2 or 3 different options on how this would work, and it would be evaluated by people in Anchorage and say, how do we stomach this? And I'll tell you, if you want to get public process, go and put a dollar sign in front of people. And that's what we need. We're having trouble getting public involved with every project. We did with the port. We had trouble getting them to come to the table until the last minute. We said, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $2 billion. Now they're involved, okay? You want involvement, do this thing first. So, you know, that's kind of the main motivation. And I would say, as far as RCA, we need to discuss that as well. I do not see that it's in RCA's purview to do stormwater. Reading what they do, I don't see stormwater. I see water, clearly related to drinking water. There is nothing in there that says stormwater. And if we're gearing this study for RCA, we're going to waste a lot of money. Let them come to us and prove to us that we need to go there. Because there's nothing in their rules and regs that say we have to go there. Sorry, I see a puzzle book. Maybe Suzanne should answer.
Yeah. Did you have anything else, Mr. Wells?
No, it's fine. I think, sorry. You want to go through the questions?
It was specifically to that before you moved on, I guess.
Oh,
That was-
sure.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding that whole description you just gave me. Is it you're saying we should put a parameter around how we create the utility using a dollar amount on an annual basis, and that's what drives how we basically implement and execute the utility?
I would expect for a rate study, pick a number, $1, 10 million, pick a number, and you can just multiply. So if you say, let's say, well, basically it's how will we do it? What's the structure? Not even looking at the dollar amount. How would you do that? How would you credit people for keeping all their, you might take Walmart say, I don't want to pay that much. I'm going to put a rain garden in the middle of my parking lot and all my runoffs going there. How much will you credit? Show me that. Okay? These are the things. Now, dollar amount, if you say, given this structure, what would Walmart pay if we raised $20 million a year? Okay, well, maybe at the end we do this thing and say, gosh, we're going to need $38 million. We're going to need, 18 million. You just do your math.
But how is that different than what they're proposing to do? I'm still not catching the
Because they're
difference.
spending $450,000 jumping the gun. We can do a rate study for much less without doing that.
Way more basic than that. I'm sorry if I'm
Okay.
being a little obtuse, but how is a rate study, like, just lay out the specific differences of what they're asking for that you don't think we need, I guess, is what maybe the better question is, because I'm getting them
Okay.
meshed together
Sure.
very quickly.
Okay, a rate study would be part of what they do. You can't do this without a rate study and say, here's how we're going to bill people. It could be the same dollar amount per property. Doesn't matter how big. You got a piece of property, you're going to pay X amount. Or it could be based on cost or cost payer. Whole variety of ways to do it. Okay, so then we do a rate study. That's absolutely in their plan. They have an RFP out there that does this capital, looks at all the broken stuff, and what will fix, and improve, and it includes the rate study. It's in there. I say break it out, do the rate study. Then look at the other stuff. A couple of reasons. When we find out what people are willing to pay, it will help them do their prioritize things in their project list. It also may make us say, we're not going to move forward with this. It's not going to work. And go back and continue to do it, modify what we're doing now, or continue to do it different. But that's the main decision, the cutoff point. Oh, and I should say, just to address, can I hit a couple other, I got the $100,000. It says in the stormwater utility report that you could do the general work for impervious services and so on for $25,000. That is roughly the same as what, in the ballpark of what we learned when we did the hillside district plan. So I multiplied by 4.
Why did you put that for?
Could have been 3, pick a number. I'm just saying, I just, I don't want to go to $400,000 or $500,000, $600,000 because it's unnecessary.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Much of this, I think, has already been said by Mr. Middleton, but I think we have 2 things going on here, right? have affordability, and then also the CPCN, the application to the RCA. And so to the point of affordability, I think what you said, Ms. Kennedy, about that $1 billion figure, people do some quick math and they're like, whoa, we can't afford this. And so some of the feedback, you know, we've been getting from folks is along those lines as to, you know, what would this look like. And I understand the specificity, the detail that's needed to completely flesh it out. But on the other hand, I can also see where, from a policy standpoint, we could probably identify already a service level just based on an initial dollar amount. You know, we know that economically we're still in a recession. There are, you know, issues with income and everything, and people are nervous about these kinds of discussions. So I think that would be, you know, one way to structure it. It kind of goes back to some of the initial parameters. But then the part about the rate study, you know, Jason and I, or Mr. Bachus and I talked a little bit yesterday about what points or the RFP, at what points would there be good spaces in which to, you know, give that feedback on affordability and everything. Because I think right now we do have a pretty good idea, just based on the report, of what we would get and what a plan taking into account $1 billion in infrastructure work over 20 years could look like. Though, of course, given that there's a different group that would contribute to that, I mean, that would affect it. So it just seems like there are two different things, and maybe it points to our need to go back to just set some general policy parameters about how we're proceeding with this, which I know is a discussion for the next AOs, but thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. All right, so I'm going to go down the list, and then if the administration wants to respond to anything, I'll add you to the bottom of the list. Ms. Salatel.
Do we have a legal opinion on whether the RCA approval is required or not? And if not, can we get one and then make sure it's shared with Assembly Council?
Yes, there was an initial, I believe it was one of the appendices in the report, where Mike McLaughlin, who was also he was the attorney for the consultant that did the first report, but he's also works for, is the attorney for AWU as well, provided an initial opinion that yes, the RCA would exert jurisdiction over this. Subsequently to all of this, we went over and had an informal meeting with the RCA that included the chair of the RCA, and I don't remember who the other, was he a lawyer or?
Engineering head, there's another commissioner as well.
And another commissioner, and they indicated to us that yes, they would exert jurisdiction over this stormwater utility, and they believe that they do based on the statute. So yes, and that is why we have been moving in that direction and planning for that work, because we are confident that is going to be necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So I have a question for Mr. Weddleton and then for the administration. So for Mr. Weddleton, because I know you often care about these kind of things, particularly, are you persuaded at all by the administration's argument this is kind of like lighting money on fire? Because we do the rate study and this preliminary rate study, but to actually go to the RCA, we need a rate study based on the other things that they are planning to do. Well, why don't you find that persuasive?
No, I think it's actually perfect that we do the rate study. Then we'll look at it, we'll decide go, no go. When you have that structure, here's how we do it, then you can apply it, say, okay, you do your CRP, so this is the exact dollar amount we need. And then you just use that rate study, here's how that dollar amount is divvied up amongst payers.
Okay, then to the administration, are you persuaded by that? And maybe you guys are using the word rate study
Right.
like in a different way. Rate study is a term of art, and you guys are using this word to mean two different things. Is that possible?
Could I ask, I'm in the queue, I have a question. This literally is the question I'm going to ask in a different way. But here's my question. What I heard at the first part of the presentation was we want to look at called a rate study, but really it's the several various cost approaches that we could have to funding this thing. Everybody pays an equal proportion. The cost causer, cost payer, and then the some mix where an escalator depending on how you have your properties laid out. That seems like one thing that is not so complex. And then we come to the rate study, which is applying that equation to all of the things that have to be composed into an approach, which is who's going to run it, how much are the staffing costs, what are the capital projects, and all the elements that have to be addressed through the study. That you can't really get to that cost method approach, right? So I think there are two conversations going on here.
But I want to hear the administration answer that question.
I might phone a friend and ask either Mr. Shimsheimer or Mr. Corsentino that probably have a little bit more experience in the actual rate study field. My understanding is that there is a lot more work that goes into all of that than just saying, here's $40 million and we'll do a math equation and do that. But I will maybe let him answer it.
I'll do my best. Mark Corsentino, the General Manager of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. So one of the things that was said that we need to be clear about is, because it reflects directly on how rates are set up, is, can the citizens pay for this? Well, they are. This is already in your taxes. And so it's, one of the things is, but it's unequitable because there's a lot of taxes and agencies. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That cost, the revenue requirements, if you will, which is one of the components of the rate study, which is revenue requirements and cost of service study. The revenue requirements dictates what are the costs there, what are the expenses that are already there. So that's there, that's a fixed number as the status quo. But then what you're alluding to, I think, John, maybe I'm incorrect. I mean, everything you're stating is good, and I agree with, but it's got to be done in a comprehensive manner because you can't, as kind of Jason said earlier on, if you don't have all the information, you can't make informed decisions. And one of the things is, from business plans to additional expenses that you may want to have revenue cover, you don't have the answers to the questions yet. So that gets to your level of service. What level of service are people willing to pay? So to be frank, we are going to do that during the rate study analysis. There will be several rate structures looked at, and part will be determined based on the level of service that we want to provide. So that has to get done. Can it be done independently? I would recommend it. I think it needs to be done comprehensively, but I'm not saying it's certainly possible. But I think you may limit yourselves down the road, and it may not be feasible and acceptable by the RCA. That's all I'll say to that. That's the best answer I can give you.
Can I do a little bit of follow-up? Is there any kind of let's call it preliminary rate study?
We've already done it, yeah. So you just take the numbers. It's very simplistic, but you can do it right now. If you want to have the exact same level of service as the ordinance says, we spend, and this is just operating expenses, about $12 million a year on operating expenses. You take that number divided by the properties who would be in the service area, which is 70,000.
Yep. You
get an annual number, and it comes out to be $14 a month. Now that's a simplex rate structure, which you assume every parcel is treated the same.
Right.
Then you get into now. Here's the other really important feature on this too. Now you're getting the rate structures in multi-dimensional rate structures because you parcel size, impervious surface, other features like that. Now you have to make sure your CIS system, which is an expense, another expense that's not in there yet, but we have them now. They're expensive, and they have to, the CIS, Customer Information System Center, which has all their customer accounts, has all the information for billing, so you can set up and send bills out. That has to be able to handle multi-dimensional rate structures. Our current one can only handle a single one. Now we are replacing it, but it's about 3 years out. It can take a stormwater utility and other utilities now, but it's limited. So we are replacing it in anticipation of future.
So I think you almost answered my question, got a solution, then you sort of veered off.
Sorry.
But
The question
so
again.
it sounds like we can do a very preliminary rate structure to satisfy what Mr. Weddleton wants, and you can run very basic, like here's every parcel, here's if we do cost causer, cost payer, and can we give you $20,000 to do that? 30,000? Can you give us a rough number so we could amend
As
this?
long as you realize how
amendment to the 1.5 million and pass the damn thing.
I'd have to think about it. The short answer is that you could, but you realize there's where the other comment is, as long as you acknowledge it's not going to be useful down the road.
That's fine. That's not what I don't think he cares about the RCA right now. I think he wants.
They're close.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not just
everyone's. It's okay.
Yeah.
But you also have to define the levels of service. Are you expecting the same level of service or not? I mean, remember that $12 million I gave you is based on the existing operating expenses. It doesn't include debt, depreciation, it doesn't include capital costs, it doesn't include any of that. All it does is say that right now all you're doing is shifting. You're saying right now property taxes in arts, I think, depending on where that $12 million came from, are paying through their taxes $12 million a year. I'm shifting this to utility at the exact same level of service, no change, and I'm spreading it out between the different number of customers, which is 70,000 the board has. That's where you get the $14 a month per parcel per year, per month, I should say, on an annual basis. You can do that in a variation of forms, you can, but again, that's assuming the exact same level of service. Now, what John said, so say I want to spend $24 million a year, I want to just double the cost. I don't know what kind of level of service that's really going to provide, but you can play with the numbers, yes, in certain ways, and you can play, it's a number game, quite frankly, but you have to have other information. So the level of service, the business plan, who's going to do this. Like you said, CIS is a cost, it's another expense, it's not necessarily factored in. Those are $6, that's a couple $100,000 a year annual expense that the reason why we were going to do this is because we already have that system in place instead of spending another. So point being is, short answer is yes, we can do it. But there's going to be a lot of assumptions, and that's all they're going to be is assumptions. Until you have a true business plan and comprehensive analysis, that's all it is. And so the question is it worth that money? And that's not my decision to make.
So then, I want to go back to, and then I'll come back to the queue. Apologies, Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Dyson. Back to Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Weddleton. Based on that analysis, what is your opinion?
Well, I wanted to comment further on the affordability piece because I didn't make it clear, I guess, in trying to point out that, yes, I think there are two different things at work here. We may be using rate study differently. I mean, there have been a number of scenarios of number crunching. I mean, our constituents have been doing that, looking at those numbers. And I mean, just even one person had, on a 40 million to 80 million SWU, stormwater utility program, per parcel, that calculation came out to be $49 per month per resident. And if that's what we're going to end up with, and I realize it depends on what service level you decide, then I don't think that's worth going to the RCA on, or even going and fleshing it out further, because it's just not affordable. And so if that means we stake in the ground right now saying, okay, yes, go do your analyses, but keep in mind that anything more than $25 a month for your average residential customer is max, at least for the next 5 years or whatever. And I don't know where you're at with that, Mr. Weddleton, or whatever amount for commercial. Just feels like there needs to be some kind of parameters on that, and we have a lot of initial data right now to do that, I think.
Mr. Weddleton?
Excuse me. Sorry, still recovering from our smoky summer. Yes, that, and what I hear is a probably ran into the court. We're going to say, this is what we need and this is what you're paying. Well, there's no way. I mean, I can't afford that. No, this is what we need and this is what you're paying. That's the direction we're going now. Okay? It'll blow up in our face like it did with the court. We need to go forward and say, here's our scheme. And when I talk to Hillsiders, they are not opposed to this. People on the hillside who know what's going on realize we got drainage problems. And I can embellish. There's a lot of unfairness going on. Stuff going on the hillside is dumping costs onto Arts. There's a $2.5 million project for Johns Creek in Ocean View because of bad development up the hill. It's not fair. Shouldn't do that. You need to do stuff on the hillside. But it also has to take into account how will you rebuild those people. You got a 1,500 square foot or footprint on a acre and a quarter lot. I'm willing to pay, and I'm willing to pay a bit for all of Anchorage. But it needs to be fair and reasonable compared to what's going on in Anchorage. So a rate study, as I conceive it, so maybe the vernacular is off, is how will you do that? How much would you pay for your lot? How much my lot is very small, not much pervious surface for my house. My warehouse is all paved, my store is all paved, and there'll be a bunch there. But I want to be able to go, this is what I'm paying, and people should be able to respond to that. And if we do it now, do it early, we'll have those long, hard discussions with Providence, with the churches, and we'll get that out of the way now before you go, this is what we're going to build. Because you say, this is what we're gonna build, and you go to those institutions and say, and you're paying this amount, little lawsuits happen, and 2 years later, we figure out we spent $500,000 or more, $1.5 million for nothing, because we're out.
Sure, Mr. Buckenstein.
Well, I just wanted to respond to that quickly. I think this is fundamentally different than the port in that we haven't even designed what we want yet. The comparison that I think Mr. Weddleton is making is we actually had a 100% designed PCT, and then we went to the users and said, you know, we're going to have to charge you this. I don't think that's what we're doing right now. What we're doing is saying, let us design it while we are also taking into account what the rates are going to be, and then as part of a robust, comprehensive public engagement campaign, we will talk to the Providences, we will talk to the nonprofits, we will talk to the churches, and at that point, we will bring everything back to you, the Assembly, to make a decision about what it's going to be, and not saying, this is what you're going to pay, because you guys are going to have to ultimately approve both the design and the structure of it, as well as the rates.
Mr. Wilson, then I want to get back to
Okay, well, that's not what you say in your report. The report says we'll do a condition assessment, which is somewhat been done, but we'll do more. Then you do a master plan, okay? Then you do a capital improvement plan, these are the dollars. Then you'll do the rate study. Then you'll tell Stormwater utility user fees. Then you'll tell Cameron, you're gonna pay X amount, because this is what we're building. I let that rate study go first. Let's get an idea what people are gonna be paying for. We have the information we need. Bracket it 10 to 40 million. Say, if we were to do status quo, then it would be a little different, because now we're including the whole city, not just the poles. You can still do the math, okay? But, at any rate, they need to see generally how they're going to be built beforehand, and then you'll have a better idea going forward. So I don't see how you really lose much, but that's going to be our trigger point. Will we afford it or not? And we need that before you spend $450,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really appreciating this conversation, because I think the more I hear John talk about it, the more I understand how he's defining a lot of this idea of this rate study versus how I think the administration might be defining the idea of a master plan. Because for me, it does all come down to how you figure out how someone gets assessed. And that's a big deal, I know, for us out in Sugar Eagle River, mostly because, you know, I believe that we're very much in a different situation than I think what's going on here in the Anchorage Bowl area. So what I'd like to see is more of something that identifies where the real need is and what kind of landscaping, if you will, attributes to this problem. So my thought is that is outside of a rate study. That's actually part of the master plan. But listening to Mr. Weddleton now, I'm thinking he's saying, no, that is part of a rate study. So somehow we've got to kind of really come up with a better definition of what we're talking about. Because I separately, just as to try to determine what somebody's going to pay, I'm not quite as interested in as much as understanding why they're going to pay. So, and then of course who's going to pay. So if that's part of a rate study, then I can support that. But if it's already part of the whole master plan concept, then we're already there without this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, this has been enlightening, as usual. My ignorance. Mr. Wilson, when you started out, what I thought you were saying was that we'd come up with an estimate of what the base rate was, plus some addition that would work down the backlog or the foreseen work out there next 25 years. And whatever method you use to decide how much what the rate to be, and whatever it is that was surplus, that much would be used every year or whatever to work down the backlog and foreseeable work. intrigued how you would figure out what people are, quote, able or willing to pay. I'm not very familiar with willing taxpayers. And
Not a tax.
not many of my constituents that I have recorded that they've made voluntary distribution to it. Churchill said, speaking of plucking geese for the feathers, one is the most feathers for the least honking. But anyways, so I'd be interested in how you are going to accurately or credibly ascertain what willing people are going to pay.
Mr. Peterson, thank you, Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And another thing we have to look at is what is the cost of not doing the SWU? We have areas that have got standing water after rainfalls or melt-offs in the spring, and it disintegrates the road, and so you end up rebuilding the road. Well, what does that end up costing? And you bring up the military, and are they going to consider that, well, we already give you PILT, we're not going to give you anything else? I don't know. I just think there's additional questions out there that we probably need to obviously take into consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Allentown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that the request is somewhat to draw an amount ceiling to drive the creation of a stormwater utility, that we don't want to see more than a certain amount on a bill. And that makes me a little bit skeptical for a couple of reasons. One is I really want to keep the conversation going towards multimodal opportunities, and that's going to come with a significant personnel cost, I can see, so that if you can install some of those mitigation measures. I live in a very impervious district, like rain gardens or other things. There's going to have to be some personnel to go and vet that you did that. So I think if we start to put any kind of ceilings on it, we're limiting the opportunities that could actually reduce people's bills in the future. And I believe, we put in the language of the HUSC, the ordinance we put forward. This all has to come back before us before it could go to the RCA. And I guess I don't want to lose sight of that. I know that there's the dollar figure here, to spend to get this comprehensive study, but I feel like if we don't do that, we get stuck with not having vetted all of our options. And maybe if we want to put some parameters around it, maybe it's goals. If we go back toward that port discussion, I think the question asked way back when the big port study was asked, what do you want with no parameters put on it? And so it drove up. But I don't know that, I'm just trying to balance those two things without limiting us unduly to get good information that could actually save the customers of this utility money in the future, and that are really long-term looking, where they could make property improvements to mitigate their effects. So I just wanted to share that and shut it up.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Quinn Davis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to everyone. This is a really good conversation. I'm appreciating it, especially the duck stuff. Or was it goose? I can't remember. Yeah. I guess I see it sort of the opposite. Maybe you two are seeing it, which is it's really bad to give your constituents an idea of what the cost will be that's wrong. And that's actually a problem we've had in the port, right? Is saying, oh, well, we have this rough number. We don't actually understand the capital that's necessary. We haven't done all the information. We haven't gathered all the information we need to give you the right number. But this is the number we think it might. Then you come back and say, oh, actually, it's $10 more a month than that. And then they freak out. So I think it's just a bad idea to come up with a rough number. I think we need all the information we can get before we come up with that number. I also think Meg's point about this is coming back to us. Like, we had an opportunity to have this conversation with way more information. So why would we try to put a number out there now? And we have a rough number. Mark just gave it to you. So obviously it's a little more complicated with your district. And to that point, I wanted to understand, I don't think we've sort of talked about that here. You guys are in a little different position because you have people who are not within districts now who would be within the utility, right? right? So can someone sort of explain that to us? Maybe it's Jason, maybe it's someone else, who, I wanna understand why you're in a unique position compared to us, and how we can help alleviate that.
I could try, and then I'll let either Mr. France or Mr. Welton add on. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. The hillside is quite unique in that they have 21 different limited road service areas, and my understanding of them, only a few of them actually have, within the language that they have approved, drainage responsibility. The rest of them now, I think all of them will argue that, as they're working on their roads, that is an aspect of making sure drainage is done properly. But then, I think a key point that gets lost quite a bit is there is large amounts of the hillside that are what we call independent service areas. So they're nothing. I mean, it's homeowners associations. I mean, it's them going around their neighborhood, passing the hat. And I think Mr. Weddleton says he used to live in an independent service area and now lives in Alersa, and got good service in both, but one was much more expensive than the other. So that is part of the issue that we're having. Is like there is a large amount of the independent service area right now that we don't have very good visibility into because we don't do any work there. So we're not necessarily sure what condition some of their infrastructure is in. So that could be something that changes. But yeah, it's a very complicated area.
Can I just follow up quickly? I think that I want to be understanding the position you're in, but that's even more reason to say, why would we give a number out if it's this complex and we don't know who's going to be involved, or who's going to be paying what? So I don't support this ordinance, but I do want to support you two and how we can best communicate to your constituents, because I think you're in a unique role.
So I just have one more person, and then you two can address all the questions. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to add a little difference on the port comparison. The port users were invited and participated in years' worth of analysis. They were at the table. They had a chronic condition of forgetting that they were at the table. Then they had leadership changes that happened over the years, so there were whole new bodies there. And so it's not a directly apt comparison to make. They literally sat at all the meetings in which those projects were developed. The thing that they had going for them is that they still believed in the model where other people were going to pay for them. And somewhere along the way, the world shifted, and that happened in the duration between when that project started and when it landed. And we're in this new reality where people have to pay for what they use, and I think this really gets us to the point closer, the overall project, to having people paying for what their needs are. So I too can't support this, but I understand the intent, and I don't want to be flip and say, why don't we rename the master plan a rate study, and then we can make it happy. But ultimately, I think we need all the information together in one place before we can establish a rate.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to you two. Then I have Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Dunbar. Whichever wants to go first to address the questions brought up.
What are the remaining questions?
Well, I got a couple. Okay. So one thing is what Chris described is every public process. All Alaskans expect someone else to pay. Okay, this is the way it is. There's always change. The public process is really difficult, and I've done a lot of road projects, and they take years and years to develop. You can go door to door, you can talk to them, look them in the face. They don't show up till the bulldozers are out there, and it's too late to make any change. What makes them see when the bulldozer's out there, and what I've been calling erroneously, Jason, thank you, a rate study needs to be done early. What we need is a rate structure study. And that says, that's how it is, that's how they phrase it here in the Stormwater Utilities Board. And that is, you haven't now, you don't live on your lot yet, it's up there in the hills and no one's touched it. You're gonna have a low rate. Yours is all paved, and you dump everything into the sewer, you're gonna be a little bit higher. You're gonna be one equivalent residential unit. I got a small lot, all paved or something. I'm gonna be two, that you do this rate structure thing. Show us how you're gonna take the money out of people. That's what we need. And then you scale it up. And it's in your report here. It's not, and you presented it as, here's kind of, look at these, and you'll get a general idea of where we're going. So I guess it'd be more proper by the vernacular in this report to call it a rate structure study. And you don't need to know the precise dollar of each pipe. Now, when it comes to us, after spending $500,000 on studies that include a rate study and a rate structure study, we'll make a decision, go or no go, okay? And we're probably not expertise enough to say, come on, we're not replacing that pipe, it's in perfectly good shape. We're gonna trust you. It's too rusty and it's got 2 years left. But we will know because we will have 100 people at the public hearing going, we're not paying that amount, okay? It's not gonna happen. We spent $500,000 or more, and the public's gonna come and the one thing they understand, we're just not gonna pay that amount. It's not fair the way you've structured this. And we are gonna choose some. We're gonna, okay, well, we'll move forward with this, and I support this. Don't get me wrong. I understand the challenges on the hillside aren't addressed here. We will be picking a level. We'll go, okay, we'll set this up, but we're gonna set it up this way, and we're not gonna charge people more than X amount. I mean, that's really what our decision will be at that point. And we can hit that at $500,000 studies, or we can hit that sooner when we go, okay, bring that conversation up now. And we'll get that conversation because people are gonna look, ooh, now the bulldozer's in my front yard, and I'm getting involved.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mrs. France?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, and I think, John, you were referring to the executive summary when you talked about
28 of 34, 28, 29,
structure
30.
determination. And Mr. Bachenston, what, in your mind, what would that involve, the rate structure determination? Is that significantly different than what would be involved in the RFP? Is calling it something different change your thing?
In my mind, no. I mean, I think what we laid out in there are kind of the accepted ways for a utility of this sort to charge the fee. I still think the position is that we still need that information to inform each of those rate structures. Now, one of the things that Mr. Welton just said that maybe is something that we could do as we go through this process, and I don't want to get too far out in front of Mr. Corsentino and Mr. Schimsheimer, but maybe one of the things that we do say is, as we go through this process, we want you to look at what is the level of service and capital improvement plan and all of those things if the residential homeowner rate was max $15 a month. And so then you have that reference point and knowing that here's $15 a month, this is the level of service. But then still let us do the entire thing and say, okay, well, if we're going to go to this level of service, it's going to be this. But at least you have something that you can say, we're going to get something that shows that at the end of the day, we're going to have something that we can show our constituents that says $15 is what's going to be the max residential fee per month. And I don't know if that's just something that popped in my head as he was just speaking.
I mean, that's helpful. That's one of the things we talked about yesterday, right? And how that also could drive up the RFP costs if we add more
additional work.
requirements. And so that would bring me to my next question, the RFP. Do you have the details yet in terms of the cost? Because I understand with the procurement process, you pick the most qualified bidder and you don't know the cost per se of each piece. Do you have that information now?
Short answer is no, because we're actually waiting to further that negotiation because the next ordinance in particular has some policy limitations on it that would put some stringent requirements on what we'd be able to do. And so that's the further discussion. But back to the original, getting back to this, if it's okay, if I can bring back the topic that you were prior talking about, rate structure, rate design, that is an incorporation of rate analysis. Now, the only hiccup I have on that process, it gets back to the original statement. If you do a rate design, which are rate structure design, if you will, there's a certain ways to set up rates for certain customer classes. And certain large industrial customers, a lot of impervious surface can pay more than a small residential homeowner or the homeowner that has nothing on the no impervious surface at all. Those are called customer classes, and the rate analysis, rate design does that. And so you can set up those structures to play with those. The key ingredient you have to have those expenses that drive the rates. And if you don't have good information to true numbers, if you will, kind of getting back to Austin's point, I can give you some estimated numbers, put in there, 10, 20, $30 million per year of annual operating expenses, put in there to develop those rates, look at those customer classes and rate designs, and assortments, but they're not real. And the concern I'd have is getting back to what you guys are all alluding to, public involvement. You tell them the number up front, that sticks like glue with them, and they're going to hold on to them no matter what. If the real number shows it's going to be different, and they go up, you run into issues. The only other further point I'll make on this whole discussion is keep in mind what I said earlier is people are paying for this now via property taxes. My original number was, $12 million divided by 70,000 properties in the Anchorage Bowl that would be eligible to pay for this was $14 a month. Right now, you take that same number, which is the true operating expense, divided by less customers because there's less taxpayers that are paying for it, just the ones that are not tax exempt. That number is actually higher. It's $15 a month. So people are actually paying more now than they would in this further scenario for that same service. If that makes sense. So that gets back to public involvement in selling it. We're not there yet because we haven't started the process.
Thank you, Ms. LaCombs. So we're going to go through these last three comments, and then we do have to move on. We have two other things to look at. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some comments then too. Three things. And maybe you're all aware of this, but I just kind of wanted to throw out there that the Chegac Eagle River area is in a road service area that already taxes itself for storm drain. And we also are on a totally different watershed system than the Anchorage Bowl is. And we also have a newer, Jason was reminding me yesterday, we actually have a newer infrastructure out there too. So this conversation is all very interesting to me, but at the same time, the questions are, so how are we involved? How does this impact Eagle River? And to a certain extent, I don't think we are at this point, but that is part of why I would like to see more of this broader study done before we start talking about rates, because we do want to know, what they think is the issue out in Eagle River and what's not being addressed, what are the big ticket items or whatever. So anyway, I think I've got a better handle on where Mr. Weddleton and Mr. France are going with this. So, but I would really like to hear more of your opinion now about where you think we are at with trying to move forward with this. So.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Dunbar.
I thought I had a way to square the circle, but of course, Tina just said I think I'm now discouraged. I don't think this is really the right vehicle for it. I'm hoping that there can be an amendment to the other proposals before us in 24 for 1.5 billion that can achieve the goals that Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Weldon are seeking out to achieve. But I won't be supporting this particular resolution unless I get some other fact down there. Sure.
Just real briefly, that ordinance, the 2019-87, is really just can we take a loan? So you couldn't really amend it because it doesn't talk about it. So we would think that was kind of the initial plan.
Doesn't seem right. I mean, can't we put some kind of strictures on them there? I mean, if it's an ordinance, can't we say, or is it a resolution? Can't we say, and you shall use this loan for this and this and this? Why can't we do that?
Perhaps we looked at it, so we could move on.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Jason and Mark, I heard it suggested that you could pretty straightforwardly take a number, $14 a month, $15 a month, and extrapolate that to a variety of structures. One would be a straight cost per lot. One would be some general impervious surface. Could we get a primer, if you will, on something simple we could share with people in the public, have this conversation? More than that, just a snapshot, like a handout, because I think that will help frame the conversation. It could be done a number of ways, like this, or some blend of these. So, I'm not done, but then I would contradict the statement that, and I do this respectfully, that the public process hasn't started. I assure you the public process has started. I had 2 community councils this week, and this question was first and foremost in their mind. And so the public process is underway. And finally, I look forward to 2 other conversations in 20 minutes.
That was a hard one.
Yeah, I agree with that. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to leave, so I wanted to just give 2 thoughts. One, I would love to see either if it's in 106 or if we can put it in the funding language that we get a comparison for different rates of service at different potential dollar rates, because I think that's what I'm hearing you guys wanna have, is that if we have 15 or 25 or whatever, because I feel like that will be the easiest way for us to communicate with our constituents. I think that's fantastic. I still think that that's going to be driven by a lot of the information the administration wants, particularly if we're at the $15 rate, we need to know what we're going to be choosing not to have versus what we're going to get. And I think it needs to happen at all the different rates of service. And we can only do that when we know the capital improvement plan and the others, how much deferred maintenance will we, kind of be holding on from year to year if we're at the $15 rate versus the $25 rate. And I think that might fit in either of the other 2 options here to kind of get that into resolution. And I would support that kind of idea. So I appreciate all the work. I get the concept. I just think right now I'm looked the other way where I need a little bit more information, or to have the dollar amounts that we may want to target, at least then later tell us what we can't get for that.
Thank you, Ms. Salatel. All right, so Mr. France, Mr. Weddleton, you want to go ahead and introduce 106 and 113, and then we'll just combine the discussions of both.
Well, 116 but 113 would be very soon after 106.
Oh.
If they're combined. Sorry, someone said that.
So which one are you looking at?
106.
106.
And I had an AM, there's an AM out there. We don't have it. So I could just briefly go through, and I think Crystal made a good argument for section 1. And I'll read from our comprehensive plan. There's really nothing in here that's particularly dramatic. Most of it's out of the stormwater utility report, which is already such a great report. Our comprehensive plan says there should be discussion of the urban/rural services. Our comp plan strategy is to formalize the different service areas in the bold and to match appropriate levels of service with intensity of land use. And that includes stormwater, so it's very explicit. So in section 1, and I think this would be something that would absolutely be done in any kind of study. You can't do 70,000 properties, $20 million, $14 a property, because that doesn't make sense, because all our properties are different. So this just breaks out and says, when you look at it, there will be districts. And one would be ARDSA, which is currently has the drainage stuff that we deal with now. The other is Anchorage Hillside, that's outside of ARDSA, which is the limited road services and impeded areas that Jason made a case for. Chugach, Birchwood, Eagle River, that Crystal made a case for, which is very different. We have systems there. We can't ignore that they're there. They'd be very different from what other areas would be. Turnagain Arm, not including Girdwood, and then Girdwood. And Girdwood functions very independently with lots of different things. So we should look at them somewhat differently. Is that possible? Yes.
Oh, okay, Mr. Austin.
The conversation of how you have divided the districts, it's interesting because if they have representation, then what you have are rural Anchorage Hillside, rural Chugach, Birchwood, Eagle River, rural Turnagain Arm, rural Girdwood, and then all of Midtown, East Anchorage, and downtown, who have a massive majority of the population lumped into one voice. And so I understand the rationale behind this division, but functionally it doesn't serve equity at all.
Okay, address that. The stormwater utility will be governed by a board that includes at least one representative from each district. It could have other people on it as well. And actually the next ordinance speaks to that somewhat, but it says we want representation from each district. But you could have 6 people from your neighborhood.
But that'll never happen. The wealth and privilege of this town is in the highest, we celebrate the highest voter districts in the city where they come from, and they all come from areas not where I live. And so the people I serve will be underrepresented in almost any universe that this structure approaches. And I'm afraid for my district, and they're afraid already. They expressed their concern for me both community councils in the last 2 days, that what's gonna happen is my poor neighbors are gonna pay for the development of the hillside's stormwater system and everywhere else. And so structurally speaking, I think this is a very challenged approach, and it doesn't represent the needs of a number of people in my district. And so I appreciate the concept, but I think that we should step back from an ordinance that's laid on the table to do this, because we're not gonna get there in an hour, and we're not gonna get there in a week, because my neighbors wanna be heard.
I say this wasn't laid on the table. However, the same argument comes from any district. Hillsiders know they're gonna be paying for all the stuff that's in the flatlands. And just like they know now, we have no library, we have no rec center, we have no nothing, and downtown gets everything. So that argument goes both ways. But
You're right, that's why we need a long conversation.
we're having it.
All right, Mr. Middleton, keep walking us through this.
So, but they're good. It doesn't say the board would only be these people, but you absolutely need to have representatives from each of these districts because things are so different in each of those areas. You can't trust someone who just knows arts to do what makes sense for you.
All right, Mr. Constant, I need Mr. Middleton to keep going.
C, for the first 5 years of full operation of the stormwater utility, funds raised in each of these districts will be spent in those districts because it is not fair for Chris Constant's district to be subsidized in the hillside. So I make sure for at least 5 years he gets equity and the hillside suffers. So C is just out of equity.
That's hillside, that's East Anchorage, Midtown, and downtown.
Right, I'm giving them all equity. 5 years, they get all their money. Okay, rate structure based on the concept of cost causer, cost payer. That's in the stormwater utility report. Rate structure provides incentives for good stormwater management with fee reductions for retention and detention on site. That's in the stormwater utility report. It's in our comprehensive plan. Undeveloped properties that are primarily in their natural state shall have a minimal fee. That simply embellishes on what's already in our comprehensive plan and in this report. Finally, utility organizations shall maximize efficiency by using AVU and Yemeni and so on. That's in the stormwater utility report. Limited road service areas and rural road service areas shall be provided the option to choose to continue to do drainage work and be reimbursed by the stormwater utility or allow the stormwater utility to take over drainage work within the service area. That's not in this report, but in discussions in our PowerPoint, that's been brought up. It's not unreasonable. Level of service will provide a program that shall, I have 3 points that are all straight out of the stormwater utility report. Section 8 is just respect for the tax cap, and it takes what we generally been paying, that $10 to $12 million a year that's been under the tax cap, and when we move it to fee-based, that baseline will, lower the tax cap. But it doesn't affect if we spend more, which presumably we will with this program, and that's why we're doing it. That part will not be restricted by the tax cap. Is that quick?
Thank you. All right, Mr. Buckenstaff.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick and just give a couple of high-level points. I think one of the problems with the first section in particular is we're creating political districts on top of what are geological districts and how we're trying to solve this problem. I think if we do it this way, it's going to create a certain amount of failure. So don't arbitrarily impose districts before we have all of the information. I think my broad comment on all of this is going to be centralized around make these items that you want us to look at during this next phase and not say this is how it shall be. Let us explore each of these, and then we will come back as part of the final product, and we will show you what does it look like if we have two districts, one hillside and one ARTSA. My sense is that the hillside is going to have to be subsidized greatly by ARTSA, just based on the fact that currently a lot of the non-payers in this system, state, federal government buildings, those sorts of things, are in ARTSA. There aren't a ton of those in the hillside area. So the hillside, I think, is going to be at a disadvantage if they go this route. The other big item is I think all of these items need to be based on whatever the final capital improvement plan is. So if we're, if you're talking about the first 5 years of full operations of the funds, and each district needs to be spent in those districts, we don't know necessarily what level of projects are going, what are the highest level projects that need to be fixed. We don't know where those are right now. So let's wait. And then the final one, the final comment that I'll make is in regards to Section 6. I think this is something that we've talked about, and the meeting that we attended with all the road board representatives. This was a topic of conversation, and I think it's a good idea. I think one thing that we should consider is that it needs to be in accordance with whatever capital improvement plan that is approved, by the Assembly or the RCA or whoever ultimately approves that they don't just get to go off, and no area gets to go off and just do any project that they want. They have to do it in a coordinated fashion that actually helps the entire system. So I will let others comment.
Thank you. Mr. Dumba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Buckenstead answered most of my questions. I have one specific one and then sort of a more general one. The general point, I think, is based on what Mr. Buckenstead said, it's just prior impressions. I think this is a more appropriate ordinance to be introduced after we have gathered the information before we go to the RCA. I think that to me makes more sense as where this could be inserted. But I have a specific question about Section 6, which is the intent here that the limited road service areas can just do the drainage work they already do or they want to do and then go to the SWU and say, hey, pay me? Or would they could basically be subcontractors? Because the whole point of the SWU is to have this comprehensive plan, right? And so what's your thinking on that? They would be more like, they're going to... Okay.
And I would change the wording. I mean, it would be, a real value of the stormwater utility is having this, particularly on the hillside, coordinated look. I mean, that's our true weakness on the hillside, is it's not coordinated, and that is desperately needed. And the stormwater utility provides that. So that's what I meant. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Dumba. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question was whether or not this was something that really ought to be addressed now versus after RCA approval. So that's still a question. The districts, the idea of having these different districts, sounds to me like you would even have to actually have a vote of the people on that to be included in said districts. Okay, Mr. Weddleton's saying no. Section 1C talks about funds raised in each of these districts will be spent in those districts, but I thought that almost defeats the purpose of saying that there are certain areas whose drainage impacts other areas, so the impacts are in other areas. So essentially, isn't that kind of problematic, where if you're not really sending the money to where the need is, it may not be in your district if you happen to be the one doing the impacting, but you haven't actually caused the result or the impact. But and then going back to Section 6, to me that sounds like that's a vote too. I mean, these service areas are voted in by the people, and you start limiting them or taking away some of their function. Wouldn't the voters in that area have to agree to that? So anyway, all my questions. Thank you.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be brief. Section 16 protects the road service area. Section 6 protects their city. The limited road service area gets to decide which way they would go.
But they would have to do that by vote.
No, this is not. If you create a service area, a new one, or I guess you can create a new one. Actually, not always with a vote, but because we created one, the police service area for highways, for example. But this doesn't. I mean, they still exist. We're not changing them. We're just respecting that some of them do great work on their own, and others would say, "Yeah, why don't you guys send the trucks and do it?" I mean, you have Mark's one. Golden is huge and does great work. The Valley does. Some are very small. So this doesn't take any power away from them. It kind of reassures you guys do good work. If you choose to, you the road service area choose to, you can do the work and get reimbursed. I mean, I think the idea that it's coordinated by the stormwater utility is critical.
Because my question is, if that service area chooses to do that and take reimbursement or some kind of rebate or whatever, does that require a vote of the taxpayers in that service area to change the structure of their current service area?
I don't know.
Or can their board make that decision?
I'm not aware of that being an issue. Dean has his hand up.
Mr. Gates?
Yes, I would just like to comment on that question. Our charter requires that the people in the service area is created, altered, or abolished. And altering the service area might be changing, for example, as like Mr. Bucket said, some have drainage in their services provided. If you need to change that, if it's going to be utility, you will need a vote of the people. That's preliminary and we should flesh out that legal issue further. If it's going to retain drainage and just be reimbursed by the utility, then that's not really a change or an alteration. They're still handling it into the service area concept.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Constant?
Just one note, last one, Mr. Wilton, I apologize for the heat I came at you with. I'm not opposed to the idea of districts. I just want to ensure that the districts are equitable in their construction, especially when the concept is that each district gets one vote. It should be, have different ordinance. And so I would say that, and I do see that your Part C in that section attempts to ensure that the money doesn't get pulled from one place to another for a measure of time. But I am just crisply concerned about how a district might be formed. And I would like to see that thoroughly vetted in the contractor's process, because equity is of most importance.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. France, do you have any final comments on this one before we go to the next one?
No,
Great, all right, let's go to the next
I
one.
just want to hear,
Can we do that? Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, this final item, 2019-113, I think is pretty straightforward. It seeks to create an advisory commission along the lines of what exists for, solid waste services and ML&P. And it does, if you turn to the section 2, identifies it'll consist of 7 members and also draws somewhat from those districts we were talking about in terms of representation. The idea being, even though Eagle River, Chudiak, Girdwood, Trinity may not be directly impacted at this point, it's important to keep people from those areas involved because we don't know what the utility will look like at the end of the day. And the other big piece to this is that under section B, where it identifies what the commission shall do. In section 3, it goes on to say that the assembly shall not adopt or approve a resolution or ordinance regarding plans or proposals for establishment, formation, or commencement of stormwater utility services until it's first reviewed by the commission and advised by that. So I would like to hear actually from Mr. Bucket on what you think the pros and cons of this approach would be, and what would be more aligned with what you hope to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. As I've told Ms. France in previous conversations, this is something that the administration does support creating. I think it will bring a lot of value. It's definitely another additional way to get public involvement, but also, I think more importantly, providing a certain amount of expertise both back to the administration and the assembly as we move through this process. The only question that I would raise for the body is, does the makeup of the commission make sense as a 7-member and how it is currently made? I think some of these other commissions are 9 or 11-member commissions. So I don't have any concrete thoughts on that yet. I'm still kind of working through kind of where additional members might be pulled from. But I would just raise that as a question, I think, for the body to decide, does this makeup work? And I think just to maybe preempt any questions that Ms. Kennedy or Mr. Dyson have about this. I do think potentially, at least for the start, it is probably a good idea to have someone from the Eagle River Chugiak area on this. But I think at the end of the day, if we decide no, Eagle River Chugiak isn't included, that there should be some consideration to taking that member off and allowing it to go to someone else within the impacted area, whatever that is, whatever the final decision is on that.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So of the three proposals, I like this one the most. I think it's a really smart idea, and I thank you for bringing it forward. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, of course, why did we do that? My concerns, as Mr. Constant has alluded to, the districts, and the thing Mr. Bacchus had just said, it has to do with the makeup here. And to me, I would remove section 4. So under section 2A, I would remove section 4 and section 5, just entirely. And the reason is because, so you've defined, it must be from the hillside, from Chugach, from Kernighan, Girdwood, and then an industrial commercial representative from Arsta. So you need 200,000 or so people living in Arsta, including the vast majority of people of color in this city. And I know this wasn't intentional. I'm not saying that you did this intentionally. I'm just saying that is the actual practical effect here, is that our actual neighborhoods where most low-income folks and people of color live do not have a seat. That they could still be appointed. They could also be one of these other people. But to avoid what seems to be a heavily skewed body as it's currently composed, I would suggest removing 4 and 5. And then as we go to actual looking for commissioners, my experience with this administration has been that they've been very open to, here's a good person who has these qualifications, please put them on this commission, or work with me to put them on this commission. Now, I would suggest we do that, especially initially. So.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar, for pointing that out. Would it change at all if we increase the number of commissioners?
I just think this prescriptive model is I just don't think it's the right way to go. Certainly if there, well, no. I think it would be easier and cleaner if we just got rid of 4 and 5. And then you have a commission, and it has people with some technical expertise, which I understand why you wanted them there. And it still has the oversight that you're seeking. But we don't say, okay, you 200,000 people in Arsta, you get 1 person, or even 2 or 3 people, but you 5,000 people in Girdwood or what have you, you get proportionally 5 times as much representation. I just think that's a mistaken approach, especially if Girdwood and Chugach River ultimately aren't going to be in the SWD at all.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, barring what Mr. Dunbar proposed, I would suggest that on number 4 we add 3 members, or an additional set of 3 people, 1 from each of the urban districts. Because again, if you look at this makeup right here, there's just no representation for a citizen who isn't a commercial or industrial business person, who lives in Fairview, Mountain View, West Anchorage, Midtown. There's no place for them in this list. And so it should be that those people at least have 1 vote in this conversation, and 1 vote each if we're going to grant a vote each to folks in these other areas. And so it might be the simpler way to simply eliminate those sections and allow for a more organic process. But certainly how it's written, it creates a whole bunch of my neighbors who have no voice.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Buckingham?
As this conversation has happened, one idea that popped in my head is, I believe on other commissions, we kind of do lay out a number of specific seats, so that, especially on the ones that are more technical, where we lay out, we want somebody with this type of experience, this type of experience. So 1, 2, and 3 I think are very good. An idea that just popped in my head as we're talking about this is, we do say at-large seats on others, but I wonder if, just to take into account the differences in all of the assembly districts, we say 1 person from each assembly district would be on the commission, so that each assembly district has kind of 1 representative. Just another idea that I'm throwing out there.
I say, in my experience, it's relatively difficult to recruit people for these boards too. I mean, like, I don't know. That's why I think the approach of just taking out some of those specifications so we find good people, we can put them on regardless of where they're from. I think it's a superior approach.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So I'll go ahead and do Mr. Corsentino, Mr. Dyson, then final comments from Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Weddleton, then we gotta move on. Oh, okay, then Ms. Kennedy too. Yeah, so go ahead, Mr. Corsentino.
Real brief. I like the concept. Just bear in mind the one thing I'll throw out there is that if this does fall under the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility as a third utility, we do have already an advisory commission, board commission, and it follows some same process. We have a couple at-large members. We have health, finance, lawyers. In other words, we already have a board commission in place. So just bear that in mind before you think about this, if it falls under the purview of the existing utility.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. Really processing on all this, and I'll state whatever it is awkwardly, and I don't mean to be offensive. So early on here, somebody, maybe from administration, said, let's keep this a technical policy or a technical decision, not a political one. And we didn't have representatives from all over the area, including mine, on the port deal, even though the port affects us all, and so on. And the highly developed areas are going to see the least visible impact, because there won't be, there'll be some streets tore up with a new pipe put in and so on, but not like organizing a whole hillside in a creek drainage area to eliminate the problems, or the areas where the roads are being wiped out by drainage problems, downhills, uphill stuff. So, and please, I'm not being callous here, but these things are going to be paid by the property owner, and of course that'll be reflected in rental rates and so on. But but marginally, and so on. So property owners certainly have a dog in the fight. The big property owners, are the ones that are hugely going to be affected. I suspect there'll be a bunch of squawking or honking and so on and so forth. So I just encourage us to stick with the people that have the knowledge and the experience, and largely the stakeholders, and not be unduly worried about what neighborhood isn't represented at this phase in the study phase, for what it's worth, respectfully.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you need it to be as well-rounded as possible. You obviously need the expertise, but at the same time, when you know you've got people from a lot of different walks and a lot of different areas of the municipality, you're going to have more credibility. And so I understand that you really definitely want the expertise in there, but people like to be involved, and they like to know that there's somebody there that speaks their language. So the more you can have all of these areas represented, even if it's just considered an at-large member, so to speak, a non-professional, put it that way, then I think you're going to have a group with better credibility with the public.
Mr. Rivera, just one brief comment.
Sure.
In the last 2 days, I had 2 very qualified citizens say they would serve, but they're not qualified by the structure that exists here.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think initially some of the people that would be willing to serve on this commission would want to be on it to try to stop it from happening in the first place.
Yep.
So we should sort of anticipate that.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Gates?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask for clarification from Mr. Corsentino. You said the AU board's an advisory board, but I guess I interpret it from the code. It sounds more like a governing board. The AU board is an institute chapter for board of directors and municipal authorities. The solid waste has an advisory commission and different chapter for advisory commissions, as well as an MLMP advisory commission. So I drafted this as an advisory commission, but the AU board would call it an advisory board.
It is now.
So it's never a governing board.
It used to be, I can't remember the terminology, I apologize, but it's changed to an advisory board now. I'm not sure the distinction between board and commission, but we have a monthly meeting with our board members, we call them.
I would just comment that I think the way that this ordinance is drafted, creating the commission, is the appropriate model to use between now and whenever the utility is actually operationalized. Once that happens, then we would probably switch it to a model similar to what the AWU board is, because that board actually does have some advisory opinions, sort of like the Port Commission, where I think the Port Commission deals with whatever the tariffs are, and then they present it to the mayor and the assembly. I believe that the way the AWU board is set up is very similar. So we would probably do some type of switch from commission to the actual board, and I don't know if we would just expand the name of the AWU board
nice.
to just bring that in. But
Great, thank you. All right, so final comments from Mr. Whittleton and Mr. France. Mr. Dyson, really quick.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm disappointed there isn't a geological engineer or a geologist or somebody that's used to dealing with topography and drainage issues.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton and Mr. France, final comments before we move on.
Thanks for the feedback. This has been really helpful, and I think maybe if we make it like a 90-member board, because it might be hard to staff.
Making decisions would be easy.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. But I guess procedurally, how to address this before the next meeting in terms of amendments, or?
I have a suggestion, and that is, it's kind of what Mr. Dunbar suggested, but not quite, is take out 4 and 5 and just put in a reserved language there that reserved for further determination. And that would allow us to come back to the question of how it's structured. Knowing all this is in place, I don't know that I'll support the tax gap piece, but we can have that conversation later. But other than that, I'm fully supportive of everything here except for the actual membership. And so just reserve that section so that we can come back to it after much deliberation. That would be what I would think.
Thank you. Any other final comments?
I have everything. I'm happy to add a few more people to this commission to deal with ARZA. It's critical. Almost not worth doing this. Now, we just throw it off to some other day. People will be involved. But we have to have people, and I don't want to think Hillside or Girdwood. We have different regimes for handling stormwater now. We have ARZA, wherever it happens to be. I don't care what races they are. We have ARZA, one way we function with stormwater in the city. Then we have limited road service areas, independent areas. I don't know what race or income they are. All I know is that's a regime we have in Anchorage for handling wastewater. Then we got Eagle River. I don't know their income or race makeup or how many of you there are, but you have it very different than those other areas. And Turnagain, Arm, and Girdwood are very different too. So you need people there who understand those areas. I think if I quizzed you guys on what is alerts and how are they defined, you don't know. You don't need to know. You need someone there who knows how those systems work. So it's more focused on systems. They need to understand how those systems are. Because whenever we stand up, it's not going to get rid of those systems. We will still have ARZA. We will still have limited road service areas, independent areas, Subursa, GBOS, So that was the thinking. And we could add 3 more people. I think it's fine. Or whatever, But I don't want to get rid of it because I think that's key. Each regime for handling stormwater should be represented, wherever it's located.
I just would add on that note that if we have 3 from the urban rural areas and only 1 from the urban area, then always the urban area will be outvoted. We're almost always.
All right, we don't need to debate this. We don't need to debate this. I'm ending this. Thank you.